Tom Smith lit up Fast and Loud with his wild humor and talent, then suddenly disappeared. But behind the scenes, the truth about his exit is more complicated than anyone imagined. Join us as we uncover the real reason that drove him away from the show. Tom Smith's departure from Fast and Loud. Tom Smith's departure from the Fast and Loud was an unexpected twist in the world of car building. The story started with a group of mechanics who had once worked under Richard Rawlings, the bold and headstrong owner of Gas Monkey Garage. What looked like a strong working relationship soon fell apart after one small incident that grew into a storm. For Tom Smith, the break from Gas Monkey did not come with ease. The moment that set everything in motion looked harmless at first, but it turned into what could not be undone. One afternoon, a visitor came to Gas Monkey and asked to take a picture with Richard Rawlings's Rolls-Royce. Smith and his fellow mechanic, Jordan Butler, saw no harm in letting it happen. To them, it was just a simple photo. But the garage manager reacted in a way that shook the shop. He did not brush it aside. Instead, he shouted across the garage and lashed out at the two mechanics in front of everyone. That moment lit the fire. Smith, never one to hold back, threw angry words right back at him and swore in return. What had started as a picture quickly turned into a clash. Rawlings did not hesitate when word spread. Smith and Butler were thrown out almost immediately. Rawlings later made it clear that he believed both men were difficult to work with and that cutting them loose was the right move for the garage. For Smith and Butler, however, being fired opened up a completely new road. Butler felt the sting more deeply, as it was the first time he had ever been let go. Smith, on the other hand, saw the situation differently. He treated the firing not as a failure, but as a push forward. He even thought about how many successful people had once been fired before finding their path. He chose not to carry shame, but instead used the moment as fuel to build something greater. Not long after leaving, Smith and Butler joined forces with two other mechanics from Texas. Scott McMillan, another former Gas Monkey worker, brought his own experience, while Thomas Weeks added a fresh sense of style and flair. Together, the four men set up their own shop. They called it Fired Up Garage, and soon Discovery Channel backed them with a new show. By October 2014, Misfit Garage was on television, standing as both a car restoration program and a story of comeback. The show carried the same kind of structure that fans of car shows had grown to love. In each episode, the crew hunted down cars that seemed forgotten. Some were rusting away in fields. Others were kept in storage units or left to rot outside. Sometimes the crew bought cars from auctions, while other times customers brought in their own vehicles, hoping to see them transformed. The team then set to work, tearing down the cars and building them back up. They used both classic methods and creative tricks to bring each machine back to life. But the magic was never smooth. Misfit Garage became known as much for its tension as for its cars. Arguments broke out over money, over parts, over designs, and over timing. Personalities clashed in the heat of the shop. Deadlines brought pressure, broken engines slowed progress, and sparks flew both on the floor and between the crew. For viewers, that drama gave the show a raw edge. It kept people glued to the screen, not just to watch cars shine again, but also to see how the team managed to hold themselves together through constant struggles. The rivalry with Gas Monkey Garage only added more weight to the show. Richard Rawlings made sure he did not fade away from the story. He showed up from time to time, often stirring up more conflict. The two shops became locked in an unspoken contest. Each side wanted to prove it could build better cars, land better deals, and grab more attention. The tension became a story of its own, running alongside the builds and giving fans more reason to follow every episode. Behind the cameras, the work was even harder. Not everything made it onto the screen. Some repairs that looked quick had actually taken endless hours. The team often found themselves forced to improvise, digging deep into toolboxes and creating custom parts when original pieces were impossible to find. Shortcuts rarely worked, and so the men had to think on their feet and push themselves through one problem after another. For all its drama, Misfit Garage stood for something larger than just car shows. It told the story of starting again after a setback. It showed how people who had been pushed out could gather themselves, build up new energy, and carve out their own place. Fired Up Garage became more than a shop. It became proof that even when things looked broken, they could be pieced back together with skill, drive, and belief. The journey was far from smooth. Mistakes were made, tempers flared, and engines failed at the worst times. Yet the crew kept pressing forward. Each finished car carried the story of struggle hidden beneath its polished surface. Viewers only saw the final product and the drama that unfolded around it, but beneath the sparks and grease were untold hours of sweat and persistence. Misfit Garage never tried to hide the roughness of its road. Instead, it leaned into it. The show became the story of a group of men who refused to stay down after being fired. It turned anger and disappointment into drive and creation. It turned a small spark of conflict into an entire series that drew fans from around the world. Even though some things never sat right and some struggles never fully eased, Misfit Garage grew into something strong. The shop stood on its own, fueled by the skills of its crew and the desire to prove themselves. From a single photo that set off a chain of events, a new world of cars and conflict was born, showing how people can take what breaks them and build something even greater. A dream come true. Tom Smith stood out on the show not only for the way he handled engines and bodywork, but also for the humor he carried into every scene. He had a sharp mind that could quickly turn a tense moment into something lighter, and his one-liners became a part of the show's charm. Many fans at the time remembered his presence as something that balanced out the often heated and competitive garage atmosphere. Yet, as years passed, his role in that chapter of television faded in memory, leaving only small reminders for those who had followed the show closely. The roots of what became Fired Up Garage connected directly to his own childhood. Long before television found him, he had imagined a space where he could work on cars and call it F&U Garage. The initials stood for Fired Up, and they stayed with him through the years. What had once been only a boyhood dream found its way into reality when the name was finally used on screen. That small detail gave the garage more meaning for him, as it tied back to a vision he had carried since he was young. Beyond the garage and the show, Tom built another path that set him apart from most mechanics. He had a deep interest in comedy, something that kept pulling him toward the stage. Even while the cameras rolled for Misfit Garage, he stepped away in his free time to perform at improv clubs, bringing his humor to live audiences. He balanced both lives, working with grease and tools during the day, and then shifting gears at night to bring laughter to crowds. Over time, comedy became more than just a side activity. It began to take up more space in his daily life, showing that his talent stretched far beyond cars. When the COVID-19 pandemic brought much of the world to a halt, Tom found a way to keep moving forward. While many shows and events were shut down, he managed to perform live comedy sessions, keeping his audiences entertained even in those difficult times. He adapted by staying on stage, proving that his drive to make people laugh could not be held back. His performances during those years kept his name alive among fans who had first discovered him through cars but stayed for his humor. Still, Tom never turned his back completely on the automotive world. He continued to work on cars, taking on personal projects, as well as tasks for clients who trusted his skills. He shared updates with his followers, showing photos and notes about the vehicles he was shaping. These posts reminded people that he remained deeply connected to the garage life that had first introduced him to them. Each update revealed the same passion for engines and restoration that had once made him a familiar face on television. What made him even more admired was the way he reached beyond his professional work to give time and energy to animals in need. He joined efforts to rescue and transport dogs, making sure they found safety and care. This side of his life showed a softer, compassionate edge that balanced out his comic and mechanical sides. Fans who followed his journey found it inspiring to see him step in to help creatures that had no voice of their own. Along the way, he also began to drop hints about the possibility of starting a show of his own. Through social media, he suggested that an auto modification program could be in the works. This stirred excitement among his supporters, many of whom had hoped to see him take the spotlight again. His posts created the sense that another chapter might still be waiting, one where both his humor and his skill with cars could come together once more. Tom stayed active online, keeping his followers updated about his projects, his shows, and his work with animals. His social media pages became a window into his life, letting people see how he continued to build on the same passion and energy that had once made him a favorite on Misfit Garage. From cars to comedy to dog rescue, his days were filled with movement, and he managed to blend all of it into a life that kept drawing attention. What made his story stand out was the way he never let himself be pinned down by one role. He moved between mechanic, performer, and volunteer, carrying the same enthusiasm into each part of his life. The boy who once dreamed of a garage grew into a man who found ways to live out several dreams at once, never staying still for long. Tom Smith kept shaping a path that felt entirely his own, one that carried on even after the lights of television moved away. Interestingly, there still seemed to be something fishy going on behind the scenes of Fired Up Garage. When Fired Up Garage appeared on television for the first time, it carried the look of a brand new shop that had boldly broken away from the shadow of Gas Monkey Garage. Viewers were led to believe that it was an independent garage with its own rules, its own crew, and its own future. Yet, beneath all the smoke and noise, the story was very different. Richard Rawlings never truly stepped aside. He had built Gas Monkey Garage into a household name, and even when Fired Up tried to stand on its own, his grip never loosened. From the very start of the very first season, his presence could be felt in ways that went far beyond a simple appearance on screen. Richard stood in the background with layers of control that shaped almost everything about the show. His role as executive producer gave him a direct line into the heart of the series. That position meant he could lay out the direction, guide the flow, and cut down anything that did not fit into his vision. Cars that rolled through the doors of Fired Up Garage were not chosen at random. Their stories were picked to create drama, excitement, or sometimes failure. Repairs were carried out with cameras in mind, with every step shaped to keep viewers hooked. Richard decided how the work was displayed, what got left out, and what kind of story the finished project would tell. Money gave him even more power. As the one who handled the budget, he held the strings that controlled how far each build could go. He could set aside enough cash to make a car shine, or he could trim the spending so that the crew had to cut corners and struggle through. Every dollar passed through his hands, and with that control, he was able to push the story in the direction he wanted. When he cut back on funds, the mechanics had to fight harder, and that created more drama for the cameras. Beyond that, he also pushed out the final product to viewers, shaping how the show reached the audience and what kind of image Fired Up Garage was meant to carry. Richard also owned the physical space where the garage operated. He was not just the face on the credits, he was the landlord. This gave him yet another angle of control. The Fired Up crew worked under a roof that technically belonged to him, and that meant he could step in whenever he pleased. Often, he would walk through the doors unannounced. Sometimes he would stir up arguments. Sometimes he would poke fun at the mechanics, push them off balance, and add fuel to whatever chaos was already brewing. His sudden arrivals always brought tension. Even though it seemed like he was playing for the cameras, his role as the landlord showed that his authority was very real. On the show, Richard often played the part of a troublemaker. He came across as someone who enjoyed throwing roadblocks into the team's path. Yet, behind the scenes, he had a clear reason to want the garage to succeed. The business needed to stay alive so that he could keep drawing money from it, both as the landlord and as the producer. Still, his behavior often painted a different picture. Instead of lifting the shop up, his actions appeared to hold the crew back, making it harder for them to move forward while at the same time keeping the viewers entertained. His name continued to appear in the credits, always close to Eddie Rovetters, the man seen as the key figure for the show. Also, his label as creative talent was never fully explained, but it gave the sense that he held influence over the feel of the series itself. He could shape the tone, the look, and even the rhythm of each episode. With each role, executive producer, landlord, creative talent, and on-screen guest, he pulled in more strings until the entire project seemed tied to him no matter how much it tried to appear free. There was also the matter of his paycheck. Reports began to spread that Richard Rawlings earned close to $22,000 for every single time he appeared on screen. That figure meant he had more than one reason to keep walking into the garage and stirring things up. His drama created ratings, and ratings created profit, not just for the network, but also directly for him. Fired Up Garage was sold to viewers as the enemy of Gas Monkey Garage, but Richard's deep ties showed that the separation was little more than a staged idea. As episodes went on, people began to catch on. Viewers noticed that his name popped up far too often in the credits for him to be an outsider. Online discussions started pointing out how staged the drama looked and how forced some of the conflicts felt. The so-called feud that was meant to draw a clear line between the two garages started to look more like a story written for entertainment. What was shown on television as a rivalry could have been little more than a planned storyline. Richard's hand in the budget, his ownership of the garage space, his management of the show's image, and his profit from appearances all tied together to form a larger picture. Fired Up Garage may have been dressed up as a breakaway shop, but in reality, it was still under his control. The two garages that were meant to stand apart actually moved under the same plan, directed by someone who knew exactly how to turn drama into profit. So how profitable was the show? Let's find out. Earnings from Fired Up Garage. Fired Up Garage appeared on television as a place full of energy and success, but away from the cameras, the picture was very different. On the screen, it seemed like a profitable shop that thrived on restoring old cars and turning them into valuable machines. In reality, the business side of it never worked as smoothly as fans imagined. Running such a shop cost far more than most people realized. Wages for skilled mechanics had to be paid on time, electricity bills never stopped coming, and the purchase of rare parts for classic vehicles drained the budget quickly. Even repainting cars and giving them a polished look so they would shine on camera added to the heavy costs. To put it in perspective, for the garage to bring in $100,000 in a single month, they would have had to complete close to 50 full builds. That kind of number was impossible with the limited staff, tools, and time they had. Attempting something like that would only have exhausted the workers and pushed them past their limits without producing the right results. The truth was simple. Working in the car industry demanded huge amounts of money before it brought anything back. Restoring vehicles meant breaking them down, replacing parts, upgrading features, giving them new paint jobs, and testing them until they worked like new again. Each step came with costs that piled up faster than profits could keep up. Fans often thought the shop stayed alive by selling the finished cars at high prices, but that was not how things worked. The real lifeline of Fired Up Garage came from the television show, Misfit Garage. The show gave the team more financial security than any car build ever could. With an audience of nearly 1.5 million viewers per episode, the exposure was enormous. People tuned in not just to see the cars, but also to watch the personalities and drama in the shop. That attention kept the garage relevant, even when the actual car sales brought in very little. On average, the garage earned only around $2,000 from each vehicle they sold. After the expenses and the time invested, such a small profit did little to keep the shop afloat, especially since it had to be shared among several partners. What truly supported the mechanics was the income from the show itself. Reports revealed that each main crew member earned between $17,000 and $25,000 for every episode. Compared to the small profits from flipping cars, this pay was the reason the team could keep going. Even with the show's backing, many builds still failed to bring meaningful returns. A clear example unfolded during Season 4 when the crew took on a 1961 Ford Econoline pickup truck. They planned to restore it with a budget of $25,000, which had to cover materials, labor, and every small detail of the build. Yet, when they finally sold it, the reality of the numbers once again showed how little money there was in the business. The buyer was actor Danny Trejo, well known from the Machete movies. Although he admired the truck, he only paid $27,000 for it. After deducting the $25,000 spent to restore it, the team was left with just $2,000 in profit. That small amount had to be divided among the partners, leaving very little for each of them after weeks of hard work. The effort poured into the build, the hours spent in the garage, and the stress of meeting deadlines did not match the thin financial return. However, there was another angle to that sale. Thomas Weeks believed the deal could help the garage in ways money could not. Trejo promised to park the flashy truck in front of one of his taco restaurants in Los Angeles. His businesses drew plenty of customers, and the idea was that people passing by would see the unusual vehicle, ask about it, and possibly discover the show. That kind of exposure could bring in new fans and spread the garage's name far beyond its usual audience. The episode did not reveal if Trejo ever parked the truck at his restaurant, but the actor seemed happy with his purchase. For him, it was a good deal. For Fired Up Garage, the benefit may have been less about profit and more about visibility. Even if they walked away with little money, the chance to gain wider attention could still pay off in the long run. The harsh truth was always the same. Television kept the garage alive. Without the paychecks from the show, the team would not have been able to cover expenses. Each car build was a gamble that required money up front, long hours of labor, and constant pressure to deliver. The outcome rarely matched the effort, but as long as cameras rolled, there was a reason to push through. Over time, though, things began to change. The demands of filming, the lack of real profits, and the constant grind wore down the people involved. One by one, members of the cast began to step away. Some left in search of better opportunities, while others grew tired of the struggle between keeping up appearances on screen and facing the financial reality behind the scenes. The dream of building cars for a living had turned into something very different from what many of them expected. Fired Up Garage remained a fascinating story for fans, but behind its bold image on television, it was a place where numbers rarely added up. It showed how tough the car restoration business could be, and how, in the end, fame and entertainment often mattered more than the cars themselves. The cycle of effort, pressure, and thin rewards defined its journey until the people who once carried it forward chose to walk away.